It's Warren Vanderhill with the Center for Middletown Studies project on Munsey's faith communities, and today I'm speaking with Dr. Julia Corbett-Hemeyer, who is the community minister at the Unitarian Universalist Church here in Muncie, but it would be important for me to mention as well that she is Professor Emeritus of Philosophy and Religious Studies at Ball State University and the author of one of the best-selling textbooks on religion in America. The date is December 12th, 2016. And Julia, I'd like to begin by asking you if you could tell me a bit about your own personal faith journey, how you became a pastor, how you came to be in the position you're in now.
Okay. Glad you started with a question that's fairly easy for me to talk about. But I like to tell people I was raised nominally nothing, although my ethnic background is basically Scottish, and if you're Scottish, you're sort of Presbyterian anyway. And so I did attend a small Presbyterian church in the tiny little town in Ohio in which I grew up, mostly because that's where the other kids I hung around with in my high school class attended. Went to the Ohio State University, sociology major, and really got into the sociology and anthropology of religion at that point, and wanted to follow up on that by doing something additional by way of academic study of religion, but was not in a real good position, wasn't in a position at all to move at that point, and so ended up going to a United Methodist seminary that's about 20 miles north of Columbus, Ohio, because I could commute. So there's I got a goodly dose of Methodism in that at that point in my background. And at the point that I was there in the early 70s, it was really good for me because it was really wide open. It was kind of post-60s flush of things. And it was a good place to explore, to think, to respond. And then went to Vanderbilt for my PhD, having decided that I wanted to do something further academic rather than at that point follow up on ministry. So, at that point when I graduated from Vanderbilt, I've got the Master of Divinity degree in my background and the academic degree, and came to Muncie to teach. That was still the era when you went someplace to teach, and if you were lucky, you retired there, and started attending church here. I discovered that the churches that I would have identified as liberal based on my prior experience in Muncie weren't all that liberal. And this was the only place that fit at all. And when I have been associated with a church, I've been associated with this church in Muncie. Retired from Ball State in 2004, and partly in order to take a position as part-time hospital chaplain at Ball Hospital, and then came on staff here in 2010 as community minister.
What are your main responsibilities as community minister?
What I do is a little bit different than what a lot of community ministers in our denomination do, because typically community ministers do first place, I am retired, or at least semi-retired, and trying very hard to remain that way.
Yeah.
So I'm not anywhere near full-time. But a lot of community ministers, virtually 100% of what they do is in some kind of community ministry, like running a social service agency, or the category encompasses military chaplains, hospital chaplains. Most of my community ministry, narrowly defined, has been writing. I see a couple of clients on average at any given time for spiritual direction, and a lot of it is still writing. A lot of it's the column I write for the Star Press newspaper, and but I do a lot more here in terms of working with primarily pastoral concerns, much more so than probably what's average for community ministry.
How would you characterize the condition of the Unitarian Universalist Church in Muncie right now compared to years past?
I'm excited. I think it's exciting. we're right on the cusp between what is called a pastoral-sized church and a program-sized church. The membership has been stable over the last number of years, but growing slowly, and we're at that point where there's a lot of transition going on. We're able to do more programming than we used to do. Yesterday morning was the Santa Lucia Festival, which always brings out a lot of kids, and there were an absolute mob of children and youth here yesterday, and which is to me one of the most exciting things going on. And there's just a lot of the numbers haven't changed a lot, but there's a lot of vibrancy, there's a lot of enthusiasm, there's a lot of, well, what if?
Right. Yeah.
There's
How many members do they have here now? Do you know?
180 to 200.
Okay, and that's been fairly stable for quite a long period of time. Aside from membership, what do you think are the key challenges that this church faces right now?
Probably how to meet the needs of an increasingly diverse congregation, and how to make that transition from a smaller to a larger church.
Okay.
Without creating a lot of chaos.
Okay. Yeah, right. As a preacher's kid, I know what the term chaos means in that context.
Yeah.
What role do you see for the Unitarian Universalist Church in the wider Muncie community?
I think there's two things. One that's, I think, more local, and one that's more also applicable on a much wider stage. But we work very, very closely with an awful lot of agencies in Muncie that help to fill in the gaps. I'm talking about places like Second Harvest, groups that work with people with varying kinds of needs. Christian Ministries, the Sleeping Room, the Muncie Mission, to fill in the gaps where people simply are not finding the services they need. But I think beyond that, I know a lot of churches do that, I know.
Yeah.
But I think beyond that, probably more uniquely, I know better than to compare that term, but Muncie is diverse in many ways. Muncie is becoming a more and more culturally diverse community, and we are internally a very, very culturally diverse community, and we can model that. We can provide a laboratory, as it were, where cultural diversity can work.
As you're only too aware, in the last several decades, Muncie has experienced considerable economic and social change.
Yeah.
In what ways have these economic and social difficulties, the loss of jobs, for example, affected this congregation?
Yeah, to be honest with you, that's a hard one for me to get a good grip on the answer to that question. But I think that certainly one thing is we have become more socially and economically diverse, as has the entire denomination. Our membership, when I started, I moved to Muncie from Tennessee in 1980, and upper the makeup of the congregation was basically upper middle class to upper socioeconomic. The Ball Brothers Association of this congregation is well known, and that has changed. We are a much more socially and economically diverse congregation than what we were, and one very straightforward example of that is in the last, I think, couple of years. I'm not sure exactly when this started, without looking it up, but we maintain an in-house food pantry to meet the needs of members and friends of the congregation who are food insecure.
Okay. I was going to.
There wouldn't have been a need for that.
Well, that was going to be one of my follow-up questions, because I was going to ask you, perhaps more specifically, do you know of members of the congregation whose lives have been affected by these kinds of economic changes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. By not being able to find jobs, by not being able to find adequate jobs, by not being able to find adequate housing. Yes.
And the church has had to come in and fill that gap.
Or at least try to.
Okay.
Or at least be supportive, because we can't, there are gaps that we cannot fill, obviously, but what we can do is be supportive of people in their search, try to connect people with agencies that perhaps can help.
Has the congregation been involved with, you mentioned some of these things in passing, but specific programs in the economic and social life of the community where the Unitarian Universalist Church has said, okay, we're going to specifically support this program or that program?
Every month, the loose offering of for the first 2 weeks, so it's a loose offering from the first 2 weeks of every month, goes to a designated social service agency. Second Harvest, A Better Way. I wish I could rattle these off the top of my head, and I can't. Moms. And that's, I said, two Sundays out of every month that the loose offering goes to partnering with other agencies that provide various kinds of assistance to people.
Has that commitment changed over the years, or is it because of the changes that have occurred in Muncie's economic life where the church has had to step in and be more active?
I think it's a circular thing. I think the commitment has grown. Historically, I mean, this has been a very social justice active denomination on a denominational, regional, and local level. And the first of our 7 principles is that we uphold the dignity and worth of every living human being. And so the commitment has always been there, but I think it's a commitment that has always been there has simply intensified.
Do you work with other churches in the community? Is there any specific kind of cooperation between this church and other churches or other faith communities in Muncie?
Yeah, there hasn't been as much that I am aware of, at least, of specific social justice programming. We have done interfaith programming with both the Jewish Temple Bethel downtown, and the Islamic Center.
Okay.
But not as much on social justice related projects. We're certainly in conversation with them on things like the whole solar energy thing, for example, but not as much direct partnership, I think.
I think it's important to note that this church has taken a leadership position among faith communities in Muncie as far as solar energy is concerned.
Yes, we have a whole roof rack up there of solar panels. And
correct. What role, if any, do you see for churches and faith communities in cultivating a sense of citizenship among their members?
I like that question. Not only among our members, but in the wider society, because diversity, I was thinking about this question I had a little bit, and I was going to say diversity is a part of the landscape, but cultural diversity is the landscape.
Right.
And that isn't going to go away. It's just, there's no way, that's not going anywhere. In fact, it's going to get more so. And disenfranchised groups are going to continue stepping forward and saying, hey, we have a place at the table too. I think what we can do as a church community, because we have had the experience with being a diverse community, we have had, and we are incredibly diverse along all kinds of lines. We can provide the model. We can provide a laboratory. We can provide two things. We can provide a place where people from the wider community come to experience that diversity and to learn how to live in that landscape. But we can also be a pocket a pocket of a vision of what can be.
Do you think there's a connection between faith and citizenship?
There certainly should be. I think sometimes there is and sometimes there is not. But I certainly think that there is in it for a lot of people. Yeah. For some people there's, for some people there isn't. The first example that comes to my mind is someone I know, not a part of this congregation, not even a resident of this state, who, because of her, who has been a lifelong, very conservative Republican, who, because of her faith commitments, absolutely could not vote for Donald Trump, and did not. So yeah, there certainly can be a connection.
Do you feel that the Unitarian Universalist commitment encourages that kind of association, that kind of involvement?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Now, I alluded to the first principle before. One of the others is the extension of the right of the democratic process, not only within our own congregation, but to everybody. And everybody needs to have a say in what affects them.
I want to switch a little bit to a couple of questions that really probably have to do more with your scholarly work
Okay.
as we begin this project,
Yeah.
than specifically focusing on your work with the Unitarian Universalist
Okay.
Church. When you write about this in your text, how do you account for the decline in membership of mainline Protestant churches in this country?
I think there's a lot of factors, and I think that actually, if you could do it, Jeffrey Haddon would be the person to interview on this one. He kind of literally wrote the book on it. But I think a couple things. I think that, for one thing, and with the sorts of shifts that you're talking about, one of the characteristics of the main line has been that they have tried to relate religion and culture positively, and to not see a big divide between them. And at this point in time, a lot of people are seeing a divide there, and consequently are not comfortable in the milieu that says, well, there isn't really that much of a divide. I think that's part of it. They have tended historically to be, and I think still are to a large extent, more intellectual in their approach than they are experiential. And the whole culture, for a whole host of reasons, is moving in the direction of being more experiential. Excuse me. I think that's a part of it. Some of the earlier research on the rise of the main line had to do with the rise
Decline.
of the decline of the main line.
Right. They'd like
the
to
rise
do,
of
they'd like it to
something
be a
else.
rise.
Yeah, right. That ain't going to happen. That they were not presenting a very, very clear message, and people were looking for something different.
Okay.
I can actually, I think I can talk a lot more fluidly about the rise of the mega churches
That's the
and
next
the rise
question.
of evangelicalism.
Yeah, how do you account for that when you write about it? The rise of the megachurches
Yeah.
and evangelical
And again, I think
Christianity.
it's a lot of things. Worship is vibrant, alive, intense. It suits the experience of a generation raised on the whole technology thing. If you go to one of those worship services, the technology is amazing.
It
Just
is.
utterly amazing.
Yeah. I think of a church that we attend in Bozeman, Montana, where they have a full-time minister for technology.
Okay, I hadn't heard of that one. Okay.
Well, I mean, that's that big, and the
Minister
technology
of
is that good that you probably
Technology.
need to have somebody
You
doing
need
that.
it, yeah. We have a webmaster.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But that's a big part of it. They provide, and they provide not only worship, but they've got gyms, they've got spas, they have basketball courts, they
Right.
got gourmet coffee bars in the lobby.
Yeah.
And as a culture, we're used to going to big malls where we have all kinds of choices.
Yeah, right. That's a good point.
And the megachurches provide, we're used to many, many choices, whether we're looking for religion or raisins. And
Yeah.
that's what we're used to. And it appeals to that. And it gets into a circular thing because the variety of programming that the megachurches were able to offer starting up attracted more people, which means they can provide a lot more programming for diverse groups and people's different interests. But I really think the intensity and vibrancy of worship has a lot to do with it.
Enthusiasm.
Enthusiasm is a good word for that, yeah.
That's the way my wife puts it. Enthusiasm.
Yeah, exactly. And that enthusiasm, and that's something that it's interesting because it's something that contrasts between kind of a very emotional worship style and one that is much more laid back and restrained. It's something we deal with here and trying to meet the needs of both of those sorts of people.
Do you think both those trends are going to continue? I mean, the phrase I get a lot is mainline Protestantism in this country is dying. The mega churches and that form of evangelical Christianity will continue to be a point of emphasis for a larger number of people. Mm-hmm. You think that's true?
I think the second is true. I think that is where the rising tide rises, right. Probably. On the other hand, I don't think I would go so far as to say that the main line is dying.
Okay.
Or if it is, it's going to be a very, very slow demise, because I think that I think my impression is that the main line still continues to meet people's needs. Okay. It's interesting. One of the things I learned from spending part of last winter in Florida, the part of Florida that we were in, there's a lot of mainline churches with huge physical plants.
Yeah.
They have become, part of what they're doing to keep themselves afloat is they have morphed themselves into cultural venues. So we went to chamber music concerts and lectures and all sorts of things in mainline churches. Mm-hmm.
Well, the church that we attend when we're in Florida for a month, in Naples, Florida, has 2 services, but they're both traditional services. Mm-hmm. And I think it's largely because of the age of the people.
I was going to say it's a demographic. Yeah. Sure.
There's no need, I don't think, in that congregation to have a praise service.
Probably not.
Yeah, as you find here, for example, in Muncie, where many of the mainline churches, to try to deal with this problem, have gone to having both a traditional service and a praise service. Mm-hmm. And you think that's something that will continue with these churches?
Probably, yeah. And it may, I can also see it evolving into something completely different. Religion has shown a very, very strong propensity, probably since its inception, to reinvent itself as the need arose. And I don't see that ending anytime soon.
A good point to conclude on. Those are the only formal questions I have, but I want to give you an opportunity to add anything else that you would like to say to people who will be viewing this, if you will.
Yeah. Your questions have been good. I think by way of possibly kind of trying to sum it up, I think that the whole deindustrialization, job loss, job shift, that all that whole ball of wax that's gone along with it, presents to faith communities, no matter what their theological tenor, a very, very strong call to be more socially involved, to meet needs, to stand, if I may, as a city set up on a hill, although it's not the way that phrase is generally used, for inclusion and diversity and respect for all people, and particularly now where that respect seems to be being challenged around every turn.
Yeah, the city and the hill not being in the John Winthrop connotation of the beacon light for all mankind.
In a derivative sense.
Right, okay. Thank you very much for participating in our project. Welcome. I appreciate it very much.
Thanks.